Heads up.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome. My name is John Paul Vicari, and I'm the managing director here at We Create Space. My pronouns are he, him. For anyone who might need a visual description, I am a half Lebanese, half Italian cisgender male. I have dark olive skin, dark curly hair. I'm currently wearing a black cardigan with a black t-shirt and have black glasses on. We've got a very special friend of ours from the We Create Space team joining us today. Sanyukta, we will give her the opportunity to introduce herself in just a few minutes, but very excited to have you as part of our discussion today on how to take things like surveys, especially centered around DEI work, and turn those into usable, actionable, and measurable tasks for your organization or your ERG in the future. So before we dive in too far, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to walk through just our agenda for today, as well as we're going to have some really great conversation with, I said, our really lovely friend, Sanyukta. So we are now at the welcome stage. So hi again, welcome. I'm going to give you a little more info about We Create Space, just in case you aren't super familiar with who we are and what we do. We've done some of the introduction already, and we're going to give you the chance to tell us your thoughts in an opening poll. And then Sanyukta and I are going to talk for a little bit together. You'll have time to ask questions. We'll talk about some of your key takeaways, as well as, ones that we've identified that are really important for the session. And then we'll ask you for your feedback before we all leave for the day. So with that, We Create Space. We are a community-led movement activating social change. Really, what that means for us is we are a UK-based community interest organization really centered on improving the lives of LGBTQ plus people and other marginalized groups across the world. How we do that is work through our partnerships, especially corporate partners, many of which are on this call, doing things like internal events and webinars and trainings, as well as bespoke consultancy projects. We do a ton of content creation. We love that we plug in really at any stage of an organization's DEI journey. And so we're able to accommodate and do quite a bit of work. We've got a collective of over 300 global change makers, all from the LGBTQ plus community with varying intersecting identities across different industries, different languages, time zones, locations, you name it. Chances are we've got someone who can talk about a very nuanced topic. Hopefully you've seen some of these stats before. What I love about these is it's not just us coming to the table and saying, oh, like we create space, want you to do this work because we know it's important. But there's so many other organizations doing great survey work, which I think is lovely for the conversation we're going to have around why DEI is really good for business. And so this one always stands out to me that only 40% of managers feel confident discussing DEI related topics. And so again, for what we're talking about today, this is going to be really important as a concept because we want you to leave here empowered, feeling like you have agency and language to use to start making some of these changes in your organization. The nonprofit side of what we do is also really exciting. So all of the paid corporate work we work on throughout the year gets reinvested back into the community at large. So if you are in any of the following cities like London or Barcelona or Berlin or Manchester, you've probably seen us at events. We host our own events that are open to the community at large. Especially if you're in Barcelona right now, we've got a ton of wellness like mental health and well-being events that are happening. So check out our website for the events, as well as we've created thousands of paid work opportunities for LGBTQ plus people across the globe. One thing we know for sure is that clients need the help. And by clients, I mean corporations, ERGs, individuals. That's really why we exist, is to help all these different groups or individuals within organizations really get to a much stronger, more inclusive, equitable culture of belonging state. As I just mentioned, we sit across all sort of functions within a business. So we can do everything from working with your marketing and product team to working with HR to working specifically within ERGs to doing leadership trainings to doing queer leadership trainings, tons of opportunities for us to work together. You've heard me mention several of these solutions that we have in place, but live conversations like what we're doing today, workshops and webinars, we do bespoke content and media partnerships, we do consultancy work and research. And again, that's such a lovely tie into what we're going to be talking about today. And so we're going to give you the opportunity to engage with us right now. And we've got a couple poll questions for you that will pop up on the screen in just a second. Please take a minute to read through and answer these. So question number one is, does your organization survey employees and/or employee resource groups on topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Your choices are yes, at least once a year, no, surveys are not in our strategy, unsure, or you're maybe launching surveys for the first time. So please go ahead and complete that first question. After that, there's one other one. So it's, what are the biggest barriers to surveying employees on DEI topics and sentiments? Options here include, my organization doesn't have a DEI strategy. Maybe you don't have employee resource groups yet. Your organization is collecting the data but does not use it effectively to drive change. And again, massive correlation to our topic today. Maybe you collect data and use it effectively, which is awesome. And we'll also talk about how to use things more effectively. Or maybe your organization doesn't do any surveying yet. So please take a second to answer these poll questions. Your feedback and input is really helpful and will also help us guide the conversation. And like I mentioned a few minutes ago, you'll have opportunities to ask questions at the end. So if something that you've heard so far is standing out to you, keep that and pop it into either the Q&A function in Zoom, or you can pop it into the chat directly. It looks like we've got most people who have answered. So awesome. Now we're looking at some results. So does the organization survey employees? 92% of you, so that's an overwhelming amount, said yes, you do some type of surveying related to DEI at least once a year. And love this one. This next question, 70% of you said your organization collects data, but does not use it effectively to drive change. So very grateful you're here with us. Just as a reminder, this is being recorded, so maybe you can coyly or not so coyly slide this recording afterwards over to some colleagues who could benefit from learning as well. So thank you all so much. So great to have you all here. And Sanyukta, I would love to come to you and have you introduce yourself to the group. Tell us who you are, what you do, all of the amazing work that you've been a part of. We want to hear it.
Sounds great. So hi everyone, I'm Sanyukta. I use she, her, pronouns. For a visual description, I am a medium-skinned South Indian woman, cisgendered woman based in Barcelona, Spain. And I'm sitting at my desk in my office room. I'm wearing a green dress with some plants behind me, and it's a very overcast day. So hopefully the light from behind me isn't distracting to anybody. Um, what else can I tell you? So I worked as a monitoring and evaluation consultant, and I'm also part of the We Create Space Speaker Collective. I run a queer and feminist-led boutique consultancy that works with the nonprofit sector and social businesses on monitoring and evaluation. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I started doing DEI work to try and make nonprofit organizations as a whole just function with accountability to their communities and to use progressive data and research. I specialize in decolonial, anti-racist, intersectional, and participatory approaches, which includes research approaches, but also just ways of being and working and doing M&E work. And yeah, I'm really excited to be talking with all of you today because surveys are one of my favorite data tools, and there's so much to unpack about accountability and co-design and beginning with the end in mind. So really looking forward to unpacking all of that. And I've made notes because I think this is, as John Paul and I were talking, it's that was likely to be the consensus from everyone is that if you did collect data, it was the next step that was missing. So I'm looking forward to discussing that with you all today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we will share all of your contact information in the chat where people can find you online, as well as your organization. And just as a reminder, she is also a part of the We Create Space collective and community. So the reason we've really come together today is off the back of our annual community survey here at We Create Space. And we thought part of the really powerful work that we want to be doing is to be more transparent with folks in the community that we're helping to serve. And so if you've not seen our community-based survey before, we'll throw the link in the chat to the findings from that, as well as our action plan. And I think this is really a great way to frame the conversation today of it is really important to collect data, but then the second piece, as Sanyuta just mentioned, of what do you do with it next is really the maybe more important part of it. I think based off, again, the opening poll, people have already stated like, yes, my organization is collecting this data and not using it effectively. And I personally am really hoping that I'll learn more because it will only make our surveys in the future internally and externally better. But it's also a really awesome perspective because you completed the survey for us as a community member, and now you here as a collective member talking about whether that was effective or maybe what we could have done differently. And we'll talk more about some of the findings and how we're putting that into action on our side. So hopefully that's a good overall indication of what we're going to be talking about today. And Sanuta, really my first question for you is, why should organizations explore using surveys for developing engagement strategies, whether that's as a whole business, a specific department, or even as an employee resource group?
I think it's a really important sort of pulse check moment for any organization or company, just because otherwise you can get caught up in the day to day of your work so much that you forget actually what is happening outside my organization. How is my work affecting the community outside? And I'll use We Create Space in my own projects as examples because the team at We Create Space is so huge. There's so many of us that do different things, and so it can get unless we poll our community, and you guys do it. We do it annually. It's a great survey that actually collects what are you looking for in your life and where can we create space fill various needs. So I think unless you do that, you don't really know how things are going forwards. And then you also can't really claim to be community led or driven, which is fine. But I think it's an important moment for people to just realign with their community needs. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And in terms of thinking, I mean, even before the survey design, like what's the planning process like for you? Like, is it we want to achieve a specific number of people to complete it? Like, how do you make a survey that actually meets your defined end objective?
Yeah, that's a very important one because I think people don't often think, certainly in my sector, about why we're doing a survey, why we're polling people, why we're asking people to take even 2 minutes out of their day. And I think beginning with that end in mind is a really useful thing to do. So to say, as We Create Space does, you guys poll every year and then you design new programs to meet that. And I'm sure you'll talk about what has actually been developed already out on the back of the survey. There's a great action plan there. So your intentions are very clear that it's like we are going to design work that actually meets everybody's needs. And so that's the need. And I think that is an important factor to start with first. And then following from that, discussing what are we able to respond to? Because if we create space has the time, budget, um, resources, interest in developing new programs to be very transparent with the community about that. As the survey did, which was saying, we'd love your thoughts about what you'd like. And based on what you respond with, we will develop new offerings to meet those needs. So to be very clear whether or not you do have the ability to do that. Sometimes people don't, and that's fine, but to tell your community, we don't right now have the time or the budget, but when we do, we will respond to your needs at that time. And this is an ongoing dialogue and just keep it all sort of transparent and above board. So everybody knows and then they're more interested in return in following you and keeping up with your work and engaging more deeply because they feel like okay, so you have acknowledged the time taken in getting my input into this, and so then I want to help you build something in the future.
So I love all of this framing. I just want to build more surveys for everyone in my life. Um, Maybe that's just my attachment style where I'm like, oh, like, why are you mad at me today? How can I fix this?
Please choose option 1 to 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes to all.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing from the We Create Space community survey, overwhelming response 2 years in a row has been really focused on LGBTQ plus mental health and well-being. So we've taken that to heart. And so in our first newsletters of the year, it was all really focused on mental health, what it's like coming back from holidays and having to step back in, going from maybe a more slow pace in December to a really high intense pace again in January, and finding different ways that you as an individual can safeguard your mental health, you as a manager can do so, and how organizations can also help facilitate that. As well as I've mentioned, the Barcelona event on wellness. Um, we had a yoga session last night. Again, please check out like all of the events that we've got coming out virtually or in person in places because so many of them have direct correlation to our survey findings like mental health. One of the other ones was having more intersectional storytelling opportunities. And what I really love about situations like you and I are in right now is like we are underrepresented in workplaces still as queer people, still as non-white people. And now here we are getting to have a discussion with change makers and leaders at organizations to help facilitate some of that. And so even just us talking about it helps us fulfill some of these findings from our surveys. And I believe Neil has already dropped the links in the chat, so please make sure you check those out. I'm really curious to hear from you on this part though. So when we're talking about strategies to help understand and analyze different groups or again, business units, ERGs, what are some of the key things that come up for you?
One of the things that I tell my organization, because a lot of NGOs will design their projects I mean, everybody really should, but many of them don't design their projects in line with what their community needs or what they know of the context. Sometimes it's done sort of unilaterally or in a silo in an office somewhere else, and it's based on what you assume the community needs. So I think at that moment, it's an important step to validate with other people. Sometimes I tell my clients to discuss with other organizations or other nonprofits or like their companies around like what are you doing here and how can we complement each other, where is your niche, where's mine, and how can we work to build something solid there. So one of the tools that's important is the survey, but I know that we create space, for example, has a lot of in Barcelona, we have a lot of in-person events here, so there's a prime ample opportunity for everyone on the team to engage with the community, speak to them in both formal and informal settings to understand how's it going, how are we helping you, what do you need, and how does your personal life and your work life look. And I think we have this really cool balance of events that address all of those different facets of a person's life. And that, and then the newsletter, which I mean, I am an avid reader of it. I'm sure everyone, it's got really great engagement because it's very detailed and there's a lot in it. And then I think having basically different data sources, not to get too nerdy about it, but basically just make sure that you triangulate and verify your information in varieties of ways, your own observations, your own separate conversations, and kind of just, yeah, like kind of like pulse check, like what's going on here and how can we understand maybe in for the community in urban India, for example, that they would like these kinds of events, but maybe the community in rural India would prefer resources that can help them feel safer in their workplace, something like that. And that's something you can find out both through a survey, because the challenges with a survey is that sometimes it doesn't reach people who, I mean, it relies on people having internet access. And so if you can meet people in person, then that's you're reaching a bunch of audience that you want through a survey. You know what I mean? So it's all of those kinds of conversations. Variety of data sources, basically.
I love that. I'm a huge data nerd, so I'm like, yeah, give me all the nerdy talk. Like, let's put it in a pivot table. Let's do a VLOOKUP. Like, let's do
Exactly.
all of the two major things in Excel I know how to do. Uh,
I don't even know
awesome.
pivot tables, so you're already ahead of me on that one. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm like, I'm a noob.
Well, we can work on that together. I love that. So I want to segue just a little bit into, okay, we've got some awareness on how we can go about gaining some insights, but really the next step, which you mentioned earlier, on then tailoring the strategy. Walk me through that. How can an organization or a group, again, business unit, ERG, really come and say, okay, here's data we have. Now we want to do something with it. What's a good starting point?
Like I mean, the resources piece is a big one. To say at the beginning, why are we doing the survey? Why are we polling our employees or our wider community, and therefore, what are we prepared to do? And so that's one angle of it. And then to immediately have this conversation afterwards about how to action those findings. And I think one of the one of the kind of strategies that I find really helps is at the end of the survey, if you leave the option for someone to say, you know, thank you for your contributions. We want to be actioning everything that you say. And if you, we'd like to have these conversations going like feedback loops, basically, to get very technical, like nerdy about it. Like if you want to keep those conversations going, we might do focus groups based on your location, because I remember the survey collected where people were living. So you could say like we may have like a continent specific focus group for everyone who lives in North America. So if you'd like to be part of that and help us further design stuff that specifically meets your needs, tick this box and we'll be in touch with you. And then that's a great way to also continue those conversations and keep it going, because that is a chance. Because I remember the survey was kind of, it was mixed and there was a lot of quant stuff, but what you quantitative data, I should say quant stuff. But what you can do with a focus group is then dive deeply into what would a successful wellness event for you look like? What are the challenges you're specifically facing that you believe a wellness event would help you overcome? And should the community support you in both your professional and personal life, and how separately, all of those things, and really get deep into the conversations, and then use that to design co-design. And again, at the end of those focus groups, you can say like, we would you be interested in being part of the pilot group that tests the first round of these events? And then what you're basically building is like this team of like a reference group, if you want to call it that, like a trusted group of people that really deeply cares about it, that you can rely on, who represent the different communities. So that's fun. I like to do that.
I could tell. It's like just so lovely to see you get so passionate about this topic. And when
It's
you
all
and
this
I spoke,
accountability stuff. Yeah.
yes, yes, I'm team accountability 100%. And when you and I were talking in preparation for this, you had mentioned a project that you were working on, and I would love for you just to give an overview of that and some of the findings and what that accountability looked like.
Yeah, sure. So that was it's a project with a feminist founder called Madre. They're based in the US and they fund globally. And they're basically at the stage of their strategy development where they're writing a new one. And they wanted to have, again, like a bit of a pulse check to make sure how is the work that we're doing and the grants that we're giving and the work that we're funding, how is that lining up with our partners' visions for their movements, for activism, for women human rights defenders around the world? Sort of, are we lining up with what you need us to be? And if not, how can we do better? So this is really cool project, and it's multilingual. We have grantees, partners, members of the staff who have various accessibility needs as well. So ensuring that the research was super feminist, very participatory, and then also embedded deeply language justice and accessibility justice was amazing. And that was an important piece where again we had this like reference group that's supporting us. And so it's made up of Madre's like long-term partners and long-term grantees who have been kind of advising us on an ongoing basis. They check the drafts of various things that we prepare. We've had conversations with them about how our work is going. We separately have a survey that's gone out to everybody in Madre's community that we've been talking to, including Madre staff, their grantees, members of our own team as well, to check our ethical standards. So are we as researchers being good to you? Are we, being respectful of your time? Have we been extractive or not? Are we upholding our standards? And we wrote this like detailed values piece. So it's like these are our values and principles. Have we upheld that? If not, how can we do better? Everything is fully anonymized. It's on typed form. Shout out to another Barcelona-based startup. Um, and that's another great way of doing it. So we made sure that everyone was completely protected with their data. And we've been checking every time we build a draft report, we have these like workshops with people where we share what we've been discussing, and then there's a round for feedback. We incorporate the feedback into revisions, which again go for further feedback. So it's just this constant thing of checking the data from different perspectives because we have grantees from around the world who would be telling us, actually, this is where my needs are, this is what my vision for the movement is, and trying to build something that's very regionally focused, but also nuanced while maintaining everyone's anonymity, data privacy, and making sure that we're representing everyone's needs accurately. Because us as researchers, we have our own biases and limitations. I'm not fluent in any of the other languages. I've got all kinds of, I won't be talking about bias now because then I can start rambling for hours. But I think that's been a really wonderful project of regularly checking in with people and making sure that the work and the way we're working, plus the research, is representative and respectful and accountable. And that every single time we get a recommendation from even one person, that it goes directly to Madre to tell them like this is what your community has been telling you. Even if one person says it, it's gone into the report, and that every single recommendation has its follow-up action items and its roadmap, so that we're just making sure that even the smallest pieces have a full feedback loop.
I love this. It sounds absolutely amazing.
It's such a
It's
cool project.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds so well thought out and planned ahead of time to have accountability throughout. But then also there's still space for maybe things that hadn't been considered to come up and that feedback to still be received, which I really love. And you've hit so many points now on like, how do you make surveys like this inclusive, right? Like inclusivity really is getting everyone's voice heard. One part of this I do want to chat through because I think it's important in this question, like an answer that we just have talked about. And I've seen these questions come into the chat, but in an ERG, for example, right, what we're looking at potentially could be a smaller sample size, either within a region or globally, obviously going to depend on the size of the organization. But within that, right, there's still power dynamics in any group. So how do you account for that in something like an ERG, which I guess maybe I'm going to make some assumptions here, but like in the US, for example, ERGs typically, in my experience and what I know of clients we work with, are mostly made up of cisgender white men who are gay. And so, how do we avoid some of those like power traps or power struggles in making sure that voices are heard throughout, like you just mentioned?
And I can't say overthrow the patriarchy, right? Because that's too complicated, but that would be my solution. But I think the first step is if to have an ERG that's representative, and if it's not, then that's something that senior management at the organization of the company would really need to address because that's a very complicated one if you are a group without power. And I say this having worked in private and nonprofit sectors as a powerless person. Um, you really can't do much if HR and senior management isn't understanding and listening to that. So in that case, enter We Create Space. because I know that there's a lot of like mentorship and leadership support that's provided. But I think if you have an instance where like let's say an ARG like this, and it's like, or if it's like a union or something has a survey, but then the people making the decisions are not the one that represents the greatest amount of the population of the company, then that needs to be something where people have to be told to step back if they don't have the self-awareness to do so like themselves. Um, I mean, failing that, it would just have to be a case of constantly speaking up if you're in a powerless position, which I've had to do, and it gets exhausting and you get burned out really bad. And yeah, it sucks. I don't have an easy answer to that. I wish, yeah. But overthrow the patriarchy, that's an easy answer. That's it.
Great. What are you doing right now? You want to go do that? Let's go.
I know, right? We got time. Let's go.
Yeah. We're hopping off, everyone. It's time to go to work. Um, this is again combining some questions that have come in, but I think are relevant in the things that we're talking about. So this is a two-for question. Someone asked, how do you drive forward change when you have an ERG that wants to make differences for other people, but the members maybe don't have the bandwidth or aren't as maybe enthusiastic about doing the next step, which is doing the work, right? That the collecting information and coming up with the strategy is great, but then when it comes to implementing it, like maybe there's some barriers there. So how do we get people more engaged during like the surveying, strategy development, and then actioning? And then secondly, if that's the case, what really is the role of senior leaders then to step in and be a part of the process and really become like DEI champions themselves?
Yeah. So the first one, I would say, if the kind of next step isn't completely clear, that's where experts, and I'm hesitant to use that word, but like experts or like specialists like myself and like we create space would come in, because then you give those survey results to a data nerd who then can help you break it down into like, suppose the survey has given you what people want as their goals, which is then the target. Maybe that's where you would need to get to in the next 2 years or 3 years or something. Then you would work with someone like us to break that down into bite-sized milestones. So what can you first start doing in order to get there? Because if people are feeling, suppose it's something massive like gender pay inequity in an organization. That's something that's very complicated, involves a lot of like organization level change, and that is beyond the scope of what an ERG can reasonably do. So that kind of this example could help answer the second part of that question. So then you would take those results to someone external, ideally, because I think within the power dynamics internally in an organization, it can be very hard for an ERG champion to directly go to senior management and say, we need gender pay equity, because then you're talking about a relatively powerless in some instances person talking to senior management, and that's never going to happen. But then enter people like us who then can help you walk through that and then break that down into manageable portions over the next 2 years so that we can actually get to that. And then I think the role of senior management at that stage, again, if the organization has this culture of self awareness, humility, understanding, respect, then that's their moment to step in and make decisions, dedicate budget, allocate resources, hire new staff, improve HR procedures. But if that's not the case, again, that's a space for people like us to come in and do training for senior management to build those relationships and to strengthen relationships between those departments, for example. Because at least from my experience in philanthropy, ERGs and senior management, it was like worlds apart, and there was active hostility between the two groups of people. So you won't have them getting into a dialogue about pay equity because they simply don't talk to each other at all. So I think, but I would say if the resources aren't there to work with an external, I think looking at someone saying, I want gender pay equity in 2 years, that's a moment for the ERG to themselves even come up with, what do we think is a reasonable bite-sized next step that we can take? Could we have conversations or seminars or talks within the organization for just to have people airing their frustrations about this issue? Because sometimes it's enough to just feel heard while HR is on their pathway to doing their job properly. And then you can slowly make those changes, within the organization, shifting culture there just by opening up conversations within siloed departments. Yeah.
my mind is just blown right now. Like there was so much in there that like
Yeah,
if
sorry, I
someone
just
was like,
like
what are your
dumped a
key
bunch of stuff
takeaways? Like
out.
I no, I just like want to write all of this down. I'm glad that this is being recorded so I can go back and listen to everything that you just said again because just
You're so
uh
kind. Thank you.
and we've seen several of those questions come in. So if you've
Okay.
submitted that, like let us know if that answers your question or not. If not, like we'll go
Yes,
back.
please. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Let me know if that was adequately answered. I haven't been checking. There's a lot of questions and I want to fully pay attention to everything, but yeah.
yes. So I think this is a good transition point for us to talk about. All right, we've done the first two things, right? We've gotten the insights, we've tailored the strategy, and now we want to implement them. That seems to be like some of the other questions that we've got left in the chat about implementation. So I want to get to that. But I think before we really implement anything, like we kind of have to continue the communication, right? Of we told everyone we were doing the survey, why we were doing it. We told everyone we were developing a strategy. We've given people the strategy. Why is it important then to tell people what the next step is?
I mean, that's
Like,
just
how do we
that's how do we do that? How do we tell people the next step? I think, I mean, again, I've been talking about you guys slash us a lot, but I think the way that we create space was communicating about the survey and kind of furthering those feedback loops is really great. It's like we heard you, we listened to you, and we're building these wellness sessions. In Barcelona, they're like free, they're varied, so you can do some breath work stuff, some yoga classes. So whatever you need to build community, to meet new people, that's there. And I feel like there's also this culture of I mean, I would feel as a member of the community very open to just text Michael or you or email one of you guys or write to you on any of the social media channels and begin that conversation. So I think that is another really cool next piece is rolling out whatever your survey results give you is important to build that relationship with your community where they feel like they can reach out to you at any time and just say something else because again with surveys what if people don't have the time to wait until next year's survey? And if some new ideas come to them in that intervening year, then say, hey, we have like office hours, or text me or message me, and we'll do stuff to constantly have that chat going. Um, that can be really good. And then I think as well within that to build whatever kind of community you have within your country or your team or your topic, whatever your organization is doing, to build partnerships with other people who are also in that space can be really cool because whatever can mutually benefit you. Suppose there's another organization like We Create Space in any in Spain, there would be someone else that we have a chat with and say, how can we work together towards these shared goals? Because our communities will all want to feel community, to feel belonging and connection, and to feel like they're being leaders in their sectors. So how can we partner? That can also be really cool and may not necessarily involve like tons of resources and capacities and time and stuff because I understand everyone's super stretched because if you're in an ERG, that's a voluntary role, but then reaching out to someone else is a cool way to also make sure you're rolling out your strategy well.
love it? Again, just
That
like there's
answers the question.
so much there. Um, I yeah, I have a million more questions I want us to get to, but even just like
Let's
that
do
one, oh gosh, just I loving this. So again, you and
it.
I spent time prepping for this, obviously. And one thing that kept coming up is transparency. And we're very transparent, I guess. I feel like We Create Space is very transparent about surveys, and we're not afraid to get critical feedback, to tell people we've received critical feedback and to do something about it. But to the earlier point you mentioned about milestones and things can take time, like how do we help others sort of understand, or how do we combat maybe the fatigue of things taking longer than what we would want them to or expect them to because of every other factor happening within a business at any given point?
Mean, that's not an easy answer or an easy question because it kind of,
No.
I mean, it just kind of sucks altogether because, I mean, I work in the kind of social justice nonprofit space and trying to tackle something like, you know, gender-based violence. or like climate change is too much. The kind of the road to get there is really long and it's really tough, and activist fatigue is very real. Um, but I think milestones in that sense and like the small steps to get there can help, because if you see um yeah, if you see the kind of the road ahead of you, and I mean even sometimes building a roadmap of, okay, let's take the example of earlier, like my organization has zero pay equity and zero pay transparency because HR doesn't care and HR doesn't listen. This may or may not be an accurate story from my actual career past. It may not be. But like that's so then, and that's a really frustrating place to get to. But then when you have the roadmap ahead where you're saying we get to the stage where HR is understanding and publishing everyone's salary globally, and we know how things are paid. HR listens to, the reviews on Glassdoor and responds to them. Then you would say, okay, the first step is for me to feel like I can have those like conversations and just being realistic about sometimes you may have a setback, but if you can see the step-by-step process to get to where you want to go, at least you know what the path ahead looks like. It sucks and it's frustrating, but okay, today I am not motivated and I don't feel like HR cares and they're not listening to me. But I know what it is that I have to do this week. I know that I need to send this email. I know that I need to try again to have a lunchtime conversation to I get people to understand why pay transparency is important. You're kind of hacking away at this issue, but at least I mean, from my experience, there's a slight amount of motivation that comes from at least seeing what you have to do today, this week, this month, and what the next thing is. Because when you have, I mean, the challenges that we're facing in ERGs and in workplaces is ginormous. Um, but just focusing on like today, yeah,
Yeah, totally get it.
there's not. I mean, that's not really an adequate answer, but I haven't found anything else to help me. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to stay sort of in this implementing action state of mind. And again, I'm going to combine a couple of questions that came in because I think they make sense sort of together. But I think there's an element of this that requires a ton of active allyship across a business. And I think in many organizations, ERGs are almost like a checkbox of like, oh, this is a thing we need to be doing. And so like we're going to give you the opportunity to do that, but then voices maybe aren't actually heard or things don't actually change on account of what those groups are, finding and wanting to do. So it's almost more like, and I'll use this person's language, but like a police mechanism, right? To sort of keep people somewhat happy, but then to not let them, maybe protest, right? For lack of a better word, like things that need to be changed or want to be done. So how do we avoid that trap of sort of ERGs just being tokenized within a business as like yes, we have DEI because we have ERGs. And then how do we get people who maybe aren't a part of those ERGs, regardless if they identify within them or not, and aren't participating or just purely allies to specific groups? Like, how do we get those people on board for things like this?
Second question is, I think, easier to answer because, I mean, let's take this example. Suppose a company has put together a survey similar to this and figured out what the DEI needs of its employees are. Then those who would be allies who are outside the space, who are maybe relatively power holders in some way. So we're talking about, cishet men who understand the value of having like a woman-led ERG in an organization. Again, I'm going to keep using the gender pay equity example because I think it's just easier to have one. Um, so that's an opportunity for them to say like, okay, again, maybe having luncheons or brown bags or a lecture. Would you guys like to like talk or come and listen and just hang out and build those relationships at a very informal level in an organization? And then I think through those, the next steps kind of naturally emerge, because building relationships of allyship isn't something that really can have a prescriptive approach. Um, and I've forgotten already what your first question was. I'm sorry.
Around sort of the policing of ERGs and maybe that like
Okay.
they're there because
Yeah.
the business thinks they like need to be there, but
Yeah.
aren't necessarily concerned with having any action from them.
Yeah. I mean, this is very complex because it gets to the heart of any organization or company is if you don't have a culture that values DEI in and of itself and the fact that employees have the right to gather, discuss, and have special interest groups, then it will always be seen as a tokenistic thing. It's like, oh, there's a brown woman whining about pay equity, or there's a brown woman whining about like workplace harassment. So that's something where maybe senior level leadership training or um, I mean, working with the various administrative compliance teams, legal, HR, senior management, the board, even. If you're talking about a company that has a governing or executive board, that can be a good place to start to have conversations. And depending on the legal structure, sometimes the ERG itself can have those conversations straight up with like a board member or someone very senior. But I think you're talking about building a workplace where everyone understands the need for those with the least power to have a voice and to have power. And if you don't have that soft skill as a human being, can't really be taught. I mean, it can be kind of mandated through trainings and stuff, but it would take getting to that stage. So unless you have that basic understanding that people have rights and people have the right to gather and talk and to work towards goals that are specific to their group of people, then that could be very complicated and very, very frustrating to work against.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more on this topic
So much.
specifically. I mean, again, like I think anytime we get into debates about the dignity of any human, like if someone is opposed to that, like it's not a conversation I typically am willing to or wanting to engage
Yeah,
with as an employee
yeah,
of I
yeah,
don't want to make myself more vulnerable at this point because like I don't think this person has values aligned sort of in that. And so
yeah.
one of the other questions that we've answered, but somebody, I don't know if it's the same person or not, asked for us to dig in a little more. And I think this is a really good opportunity for us to talk about like continuous improvement. So, how do we make it so that if we do one survey, that feedback loop is open and continuous, but then at the same time, we are still encouraging ERG members, non-ERG members to one, a place of accountability, and B, like get again, continue just to foster like deeper relationships within the organization. So what does that look like? So maybe you've seen something go wildly wrong in a survey or a study you've worked on. But that really the next step of like why is that feedback loop so important as part of a continuing strategy? I realize I've asked several questions within this, so go
You
ahead and
have, and I'm
just
I'm
answer
picking
what
I'm picking the one that I want to answer the most. That's okay. I'm and bring forward that prerogative. I think that's a from a practical standpoint, as like a company or an organization, having a feedback loop open constantly, if you want to get businessy about it, it helps you respond to your stakeholders the most. So you actually know as a company that you're developing services that actually meet people's needs, and then they'll buy your service or your good, and then you'll keep that going. So it's actually just the best business practice. But from an ethical standpoint, which is obviously what I'm more interested in, it means that you actually know that you're doing work that's relevant and meaningful and hitting the right mark, and that you're not wasting resources and time going down a pathway that nobody's interested in. Because what if you're like you've built a program where actually you're targeting middle level managers at a company, but actually what's really needed is for senior leadership or for a board member to be more engaged with an ERG. So then actually, okay, we're actually wasting time on that thing. Let's reorient in this way. But I think also feedback loops is just a very important relationship building tool because this goes back to what I was saying at the start. It can be very easy for all of us to get sucked into the day to day minutia of the work that we're doing and forget that we're actually serving a community or serving our clients or whatever. And that relationship is one that needs to be nurtured. And it's a way to create dialogue. And especially if you're talking about a company like We Create Space, who does have people everywhere, but is not, I'm assuming, present in every single country where you have people. So you're creating these relationships virtually. And that's an important way to do that is um, through social media, through, having a newsletter where you're encouraging people to like reply back to you and tell you a little bit more, that can help you like truly understand what they're actually working with. And in an ERG and an international company, that's the best way because what if you have an ERG that's like in the New York office, but then you have people all over the world who may also be allies of yours? That's a great way to build like a group of support who then power in numbers and all of that stuff.
And
I know that was
just
only one of your questions, and that's it.
no,
I'm
but
done.
that answered so many other ones that I'm enthralled by it. So thank you. I'm aware of time that we've got about 8 minutes left. And so we still have questions that have come in, plus things that we were going to chat about. And so I'm going to find a way to maybe bring some of these together. Um, but one of the questions that came in, and I think maybe this can be linked to what you and I had spoke about on making surveys like equitable, accessible, and enjoyable for people. But part one of this question will be like, how do we design surveys or survey strategies or data collection strategies that aren't just viewed by other people as self-serving for a specific group? So that's part one. Part two then will be like, how do we avoid survey fatigue? Like people get surveys a lot in large organizations, especially like how do we get to a place where maybe we're asking fewer questions but more meaningful questions? Is there any best practice on that? So wherever you want to start with those two questions, it's great.
Sure. I think self-serving is a hard one because they all have to be to some extent, and I think that's fine. Um, but again, to repeat what we've been talking about a lot, I think having it in there something very clear to your audience that this is how it also benefits them, or this is how the results of it could benefit them. Um, that's the only thing that I can think of off the top of my head is like, I mean, taking the Madre example, there was no reason that Madre's grantees would answer that survey unless they were also interested in Madre's strategy or the results of this research lining up with this. So you already have to have, I mean, it is self-serving, but in some extent, your community can be engaged with it. Um, but we made that clear. It's like if you participate in this, the results of your insights and your expertise could help us inform the research, which we will be taking directly to Madre. They may review it and they may want to act on some of what you directly tell them. So this is a great opportunity for you. We get that it takes time. The other thing that I think can help with survey fatigue. I mean, there's a couple of things about, methodology and design and things like that that we can get into later. I mean, like the We Create Space one, have it be multiple choice, mixed methods, quantitative and qualitative. So you're asking people for text-based inputs, but then you're also getting them to like pick one of a list of five, because then that's going to take me hardly any time. And if you ask me to give you numbers, that's also easier. How many events do you think you can go to next year? That's an easy choice. um, and then the other one, I'm thinking as well. I mean, people think about what it is, and this is everyone here, think about what it is that makes you want to answer any survey, right? Sometimes if it's because the topic is really interesting, or the person asking you is someone that you care about, or whose work you care about. But then also sometimes when I see a survey that's like, you'll be entered into a draw to win like a cruise around the world, I'm like, terrific, I'm gonna go into that. So there are ways that you can compensate people for their time. You can either give them like, like a voucher to something or a gift card to something, or like a free ticket to your next event or something like that. Doesn't have to be money, but again, talking to people here, because I was reading some of the chat, is that people were from various organizations and companies. Maybe you're hosting a community event that's paid, and maybe you can auction off like a lower paid ticket to every fifth or 10th responder. So they might receive like a pop up, and then that's an incentive as well there. But I think most importantly for survey fatigue, the big one to avoid that is to make sure that it's very concise and clear, 5 to 6 questions max, multiple choice. Give people the option to tick a box and continue a conversation with you if they want to. And then that's where you ask the deeper qualitative questions. Um, and also then focus on the 5 to 6 most important and actionable for you, because there's no end to the questions you can ask your community, but then what are you actually able to implement? And then you ask questions that would help you with that.
Awesome. I love it. I can't believe we only have 4 minutes left. I'm gonna get my screen shared with some key takeaways really quickly, and then we're gonna ask you to complete our feedback survey, because again, we want feedback on how to make these more enjoyable. So while I'm doing that, Sanyukta, just thank you so much. This has been so amazing. I'm sorry to everyone else that we couldn't get to every single question. But again, like this is part of what we do as follow-up is we'll answer questions in our follow-up email that we didn't get to. But I would love for you maybe just to give like a final thought and then like if people want additional examples of like well-run, produced surveys with implementable action, like do you have examples on your website? I know we have some that we can share, but like what are good ways for people to find out more about how to do this work?
Sure. I think like if anyone has questions or whatever, I think you can definitely feel free to email me, get in touch with me on LinkedIn or whatever. I'm gonna go and find my link and pop it in the chat. But I think definitely keep those conversations going because there are some best practices and like generic ideas that you can have, but a lot of the times the best solutions are the tailored ones. So I have this open office hours things where people in NGOs specifically, but any organization, you just have a quick chat with me about something so we can walk through your specific ideas. Um, I don't yet have any examples of surveys on my website because of data protection issues with my clients, but I know We Create Space does have tons, and that's great. Um, and yeah, I think just yeah, if there's any remaining questions, just feel free to get in touch. Let me find my LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you. So quickly, some key takeaways. Love that this first one is here. Take time to understand. I think for anyone within the organization, that is super critical. Communicate the benefits. We want to have continuous engagement. We want to tailor strategies. We really want to use Find These as an accountability tool to have that continuous feedback loop. The implementation, again, transparency and communication is so key. And I think really the most important one on here for me is the be patient. Like all change takes time and it is frustrating, I think, especially in any marginalized group to be constantly told that. But you're also not alone in the work. So if you are feeling frustrated, like please know, like you can reach out to any of the We Create Space team. We're happy to listen if you need to vent about anything. So please reach out. And as I said, last but not least, we want you to tell us what you thought of today. What could we do better? What would you have liked to hear more of, less of? Are there additional topics, maybe adjacent to what we've talked about today that you could fill out and tell us what is important to you? Again, this conversation today was brought from our survey, and now we're talking about running surveys. And so it has just been a really beautiful way for us to tie everything together. But at the end of the day, like this is all for you, the people that we work with. So please take a minute, scan the QR code. I believe the link to fill it out is also in the chat. If you're running short on time, that's also okay. We will be sharing the survey in our follow-up email as well as the recording. And Senyukta, again, like I kind of picked like a better conversation to have. I'm just so thrilled that I got to be the person to have this talk with you. It's just been a pleasure to have your expertise and guidance here with us. And if you're in Barcelona, you will see her at We Create Space events. And if you're interested at all in working with us and having Senyukta be a consultant, please just reach out. We would love to get you in touch. So yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just so over
Thank
the
you so
moon
much.
right.
You were so kind. No, this has been amazing. And I hope I didn't, you know, talk too much or get too convoluted in my various parts, but there's just so much to unpack here. This has been absolutely amazing. You're a star. Thank you guys. Really.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Please, again, if you can, fill out our survey, and we will see you soon for our next event. Check out the events on our website. Just going to keep shamelessly plugging all the great things that we're doing because it's, again, all rooted in community survey stuff, so why not? And have a lovely, what's today? Thursday. Today's Thursday. We're almost to the weekend, guys. We made it. Love this for us. We will see you all on the other side.